Okay, we're back in the workshop today, so apologies for the audio. I know it's a little bit quieter on my phone, but I'll do my best. So we're looking at putting in a few gauges, a few extra gauges. So the main one I want to put in is oil pressure. Obviously it speaks for itself, very important with an engine. You get the dummy light on the dashboard anyway, but that doesn't tell you, that just tells you if you've got no oil pressure, by which point, you know, your engine's probably borked. So by having an oil pressure gauge somewhere where you can see it all the time, if you suddenly start losing oil pressure, you've got time to pull over and probably save your engine. Whereas if you wait on the dummy light, like I say, you've probably had it. So this is just one I found in my friend of mine's bits boxes. It's a Jaeger gauge, very similar to your old Smith's gauge. It's a mechanical oil pressure. Obviously we screw a ferrule onto the back there, and then the corresponding end goes onto the block. I've ordered that junction T-piece, but it's not here yet. So we're just going to make up a little bezel to hold these lights, these gauges for the moment. So we got our Jaeger oil. Also picked up this chap off Facebook for £10. It's a VDO volts gauge. If I'm going to have gauges, I may as well have two. The volts gauge, I don't want it necessarily to check on the condition of the battery. This is more for the alternator. I want to see this thing putting out 14 volts all the time. If that voltage drops from 14 down to 12, I know the alternator is not working anymore, and I need to, you know, turn around and go home before my battery dies. So that's the purpose of those two gauges. Now, of course, the question is, where do you put said gauges? And as you can see here, we've already got a little bezel pre-made. So this is just a piece of roofing aluminium, or aluminum if you're from the States. I think it's probably 1.5 mil, something like that. We had a bit of it lying around, and all we've done there is just draw around the gauges, put it in a vise, tap the side down with a panel hammer, and put this slight angle to it, which is obviously going to then bolt up behind the gear stick, like so. I haven't put it at a right angle because I'm just concerned I want to be able to see it, and if it's at a right angle down like that, I'm not going to be able to see it when I'm driving, so I want it more at an angle like this. So what we need, a couple of things we need to do. First I need to mark this out and then cut the holes in it, ready to fit the two gauges, as well as drill the two holes in the top which will attach to the dashboard. And the other thing I need to do is, whilst the Jaeger gauge has a lovely chrome bezel, this one was black. Now I've just quickly sprayed it silver, seeing what it came out like, and of course it looks crap. It just looks grey because it's you know, it's silver spray. It doesn't look even remotely like chrome. So we've got a little cheat for this. So chrome is obviously very expensive. If you've ever got a quote to get anything chromed, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Chroming is very, very expensive. It's also very expensive to try and find a silver spray, as in a very, very chrome spray. You can get Alclad chrome. It's horrifically expensive. We're not going to do that. So we're going to use a little bit of a cheat, which is some of our aluminium plumbing foil tape. Now the tape isn't actually wide enough to do the gauge in one. It will only do half at a time. But what we can do is stick this on, cut it off. Yes, we're going to have a join somewhere across the middle where the tape goes. We can rub it down, trim the screen out, and it's going to look 10 times better than this. So it's a nice quick win. Let's give it a go and see if it works. There we go. A little bit of the old aluminium foil tape pressed on. Not bad. Obviously you can see the seams on the edges there where I've had to overlap the tape. Oh well. Is it as good as chrome plating? No, clearly not. Is it better than silver paint? Yeah, I think so. Inexpensive, takes 10 minutes to do, and that pairs those gauges together much nicer. I'll show you in the daylight. So yeah, not perfectly chrome, but pretty good. Any of you guys ever used to watch The Fall Guy? Got the old Chevy truck. Go in there in the meantime. Not mine, I hasten to add. So yeah, so that brings those two gauges together much nicer. Like I say, it's just simply a case of sticking some aluminium tape over the top, trimming it out very carefully with a knife. You can see how far down I've gone on the side there. That's the old silver paint underneath. That's with the aluminium tape. Just to give you an idea of the contrast between the two. One is a silver colour and one is actually shiny. And then if you really wanted to, you could just run another piece of aluminium tape around the side of that, just to face that off slightly nicer. Personally, I'm not going to bother because you're never going to see it. you know, it's going to be right down in the car near where the gear stick is, so you're not going to see it. I don't even know if this is a good gauge. VDO, is that good? I don't know. Fact was, it was a tenner on Facebook. Somebody had one of the original Smith's voltage gauges and they wanted £75 for it. What? I'm not paying £75 for a gauge that's worth a tenner. It's worth a tenner. I'm paying a tenner for it. So he was a tenner and he was free because, again, I snaffled it out of a friend's spares box. So, next thing to do, get this plate measured up, stick some lines on it so we find the center lines, work out where our gauges are going to go, draw some circles, get the old circle punch cutter, 2 holes in that. And then with this, I'm not sure what we're going to do with this yet. Probably going to paint it black. I don't know. Or put some kind of wrap on it. I don't know. I've still got some of the walnut wrap left when I did the dashboard. I could do a walnut inlay. I don't know. I think what I'll do is I'll get these home. We'll get this cut. We'll get these home. And then we'll have a look and see how it looks. Tell you what, lads. You talk about engine rebuilds and stuff being hard work. You ever tried rethreading a 5-thread overlocking machine? Trying to fish these threads out with a screwdriver. It's a nightmare. So we've gone ahead there, we've marked out our centre lines, measure the sides, draw it in, and then we've used our circle cutter there to get some nice circles out of aluminium. I don't know what that circle cutter is called. It's one of those 2-piece ones where you just squeeze it together with an Allen key and it chomps out a circle for you. They're a little bit on the small side. The gauges don't quite go through them yet. Hard to show you with one hand. They're a little bit tight, but that's fine. You know, they're 98% there. We'll get them on the old whirly wheel on the Dremel. Just to profile those out a little bit. And then hopefully those gauges should just slot right on in. There we go, a couple minutes with the old whirly wheel and they're in. I appreciate this is upside down, obviously this is the top edge, but you know, you get the idea. I can bang them in all the way, I'm just not going to yet. Obviously I don't want to get them stuck and have to pull them out again afterwards. So they sit in there quite happily. So all we need to do now is just tidy this whole thing up a little bit. It's still a little bit rougher on the edges. Some of these edges need profiling down again. I need to get in there and grind some of the excess metal away. And then work out some kind of paint scheme for it. I don't really know what to do yet. I'm thinking probably going to be gloss black. And then I might do the same sort of silver edging on it, like I've done with that bezel. Don't know. Maybe just do it black and have done with it. I don't know. See how I feel like. There we go, we've gone with a matte black. It still does have a bit of shine to it if I try and catch her in the light there, because, well, paint's still wet. There we go. But it will matte out as it dries through thoroughly. So we're just going to leave that one to dry now. I've still got to drill my holes in the top where I'm actually going to locate it onto the bottom of the dash, but obviously I don't want to pre-drill the holes until I've got it up against the car, because I don't know where the holes need to go. Hopefully I'll find a couple existing holes down there. As I say, it's going to go where the radio normally goes, that little like H panel stand-up thing, you know what I mean, just behind the gear stick. So it's going to go down there somewhere. So I'll wait until I get it back to the car, and then I'll just drill those 2 holes to finish with, and then we may either rivet it on or see if we can just go in with a couple small like M3 nuts and bolts. So we'll leave that one alone to dry, because I know what I'm like. I'll normally just grab my gauges and just try and stuff them in there without, you know, without probably letting it dry, and I'll smear it. So let's try and do at least a semi-decent job for the time being and actually let it dry. There we go, that's dry, so it's all matted off. It's a bit wibbly wobbly as you can see, it's not perfect. Obviously the cutters are off, one bezel's bigger than the other, one's chrome, one's silver, blah blah blah. Is it perfect? No. Is it good enough for me? Yeah. As always, doing things on a budget. Okay, so we are back at home with our gauges. Now we've picked up our T-piece. So hopefully this is the right one. This is actually for a mini, but I'm hoping it's the right size. We're going to find out. This obviously allows you to attach an oil pressure switch and your oil pressure gauge, and that just screws into the block. Then you have obviously your flexi hose. This is filled with oil, goes to the back of your oil pressure gauge and tells you your oil pressure. Pretty straightforward, right? And then obviously your volt gauge is just quite simply 2 connections on the back, one for live, one for ground, and then we have a light if you want it to be illuminated. Again, I don't drive mine in the dark, not bothered about that. I'll probably just snip that off or tape it up and tuck it out of the way. I have already put this across the battery. It does work, it does go up to 12 volts, so that's good. Obviously oil pressure gauge I can't test until the actual engine's running, but I've got no reason to believe it doesn't work. So the first thing we need to do is put our bezel in. So I'm going to have to find, go underneath the dash, have a little look around, find a couple of holes, drill a couple of holes, put some rivets or bolts through that, and mount that where you want it first of all. At that point I can then start fishing all this stuff through. What I don't want to do is start taking all the bits out of the block. See how much better those big wheels look? They're bigger, they're not big, but they're bigger. Looks more race car like. Yeah, I don't want to start messing around taking the switch out of the block without somewhere to put the gauge, because, you know, if I get oil all over the place or whatever, you know, I want it to be able to just go straight in, plumb it in, job done. So, in case you don't know, your oil pressure switch is this little fella here. Get you a bit of zoom down there. That's your oil pressure gauge down there, and as you can see, you've just got one wire coming off it, which is, I believe, white with a brown stripe, and that obviously goes to your dummy light up on your dashboard. It should light when you start the engine and then go out when it's received sufficient oil pressure. Now, of course, as I say, it is a dummy light. It's called a dummy light for a reason. It doesn't tell you anything other than whether you have oil pressure, yes or no. It doesn't tell you how much oil pressure you have. So if you were driving along and, say, something terrible was to happen, the block was to crack, the sun was to fall off, whatever, something was to happen, the oil was to start pouring out of your engine, your light would only come on when there was 0 oil pressure, I believe. So at that point, you've pretty much balked it, because, you know, there's no oil left in your engine's still running, it's going to basically get hot and seize on you. You probably won't have time to do anything about it. Whereas obviously with an oil pressure gauge, you can keep a constant look on it as you're driving. Obviously as you increase RPM, the oil pump is working harder, so you should notice your oil pressure going up, and as you come off the pedal you should notice the oil pressure coming down, but you should have a stable point there, you know, just to show where your pressure is. And obviously what your oil pressure is depends on the engine, what condition the piston, the rings are in, you know, what oil you've got on it. There's so many variables to it. All you want to know is, have you got good oil pressure, yes or no, and are you maintaining good oil pressure when you're driving? If the answer to both those is yes, then you're good to go. If that needle starts dropping when you're driving, you've got time to pull over, turn the engine off before you get to 0 oil pressure, and then obviously tow it home, you know, whatever. So we're going to keep the oil pressure switch, hence why we've got a T-piece. If you don't want to keep your oil pressure switch, you don't have to have a T-piece. You can just take the switch out, put the oil pressure gauge in its place, and, you know, you're good to go. It's a mechanical gauge, no electrical wiring for it at all. It literally just has, I mean, it obviously has the backlight, the bulb socket in the back, same as all the other Triumph gauges, in case you want it backlit. If you drive at night, obviously you do. That's pretty straightforward, just get a little bulb to go in there. But otherwise it's just a pure mechanical gauge with a hose going to it. Now, one of the questions I thought of at the time was, when you install your oil pressure gauge, do you need to bleed the line? Do you need to, you know, build oil pressure, slack on the nut off, let the air escape, and then put the nut back on again? And the answer is no. And I thought, that's a bit strange. And then someone pointed out in the forums and, you know, made a good point, and they just said, pressure is pressure. Whether you've got air in the line, you've got oil in the line, it doesn't necessarily matter. As soon as your engine starts, there's a bloody great spider here chasing me. I say it's a bloody great spider, it's actually a really small one, but I don't like spiders. I don't trust anything with more than one pair of eyes. And he's completely thrown me off. Where was I? Oh, pressure gauge, yes. So whether you've got air in the line, oil in the line, whatever, as soon as it gets to its pressure, the pressure is the pressure. It doesn't matter whether it's full of yogurt, Lego, or anything else. Pressure is pressure. So the answer is no, we don't have to bleed the line, but I probably will anyway, just because, you know, that's how I am. So the first thing to ascertain is whether we've got the right fitting on our T-piece. As I say, as for a classic Mini, the seller believed it was the right one, but, you know, we've all heard that before. So I suppose what we need to do is take our oil pressure switch out, put our T-piece in and make sure it actually fits before we do anything else. So let's do that first. So, gauges are going to go at the bottom here. Now, as you can see, I don't have this piece in here where the stereo would normally go. You know, I just never bother putting in because I don't want to put a stereo in the car. So what I have got, if you can see it, is this white metal bar. You can see there's a hole there, and there's a hole tucked away under the trim. There's a hole here. So I've got two holes in that bar. So what I'm hoping is you can get the old plate, put her in there, up against that bar, and she will sit something like that. That's the plan. I've pushed the gear stick all the way forward. It does fit. It's not going to foul on it, so that's good. So this is wide enough to fit to cover those two holes. So let's mark it, drill it, and then see if we can put a couple bolts in and get that bezel in place. Once the bezel's in place, I can put the gauges in and start to wire the old sucker in. Now, because of the angle, we've had to bend it back the other way. So it used to be bent, well, the other way, basically. But because it's coming down off a flat, I need to be able to see those gauges. So if you imagine the edge of my workbench is that white metal bar, boom, she's going to sit on there. The gauges then kick out towards me slightly. That's what we want, isn't it? Obviously some of my paint's come off, but you know, we can touch that up afterwards. And then we've just been in the old spare nuts and bolts box. Everyone's got a spare nuts and bolts box, right? A couple of M6s in there. They'll go in quite nicely. And then hopefully we can pinch the old girl in. Okay, she's in there. A couple of little nuts up there. Good to go. I really need to sort the interior out in this car. It's the one thing that really lets it down. Well, that's a job for another day. So they're in there. Gear stick doesn't interfere. So right, that is our T-piece installed. Down there. So she's in the block. Oil pressure switch is in the side. Didn't have the right size spanner for that oil pressure switch. It's big. I'm guessing it must be 1 inch. Biggest I've got is 13/16, and that wasn't big enough. So I had to use the old vice grips on the oil pressure switch. But that's in the block, so I just need to connect my flexi hose to the other side of that. Fish it into the dash. No problem on these cars because you've got this big hole right here in the bulkhead where the wiring loom comes out. So she'll go back in through there. Oh, not easy. Works. Nothing's run out of it, which is nice. Got some air in the line there, but again, doesn't seem to make any difference to the oil pressure. I need to lengthen the oil pressure switch cable because that is now not long enough, but that's okay. That's a bit of snipping and poking, but success, I'd say. Like I say, the old oil pressure gauge works all right. So yeah, pretty simple install really. I just need to actually secure the oil pressure gauge. Obviously I left it loose for the time being in case oil sprayed out of it or something. But yeah, pretty straightforward. That T-piece fits, all the fittings fit. Screw it up tight. That's it really. Right, a bit of old speaker wire. It's 12 volts, that's all she needs. A couple of mini ring connectors on there. Crimped and soldered. I never trust the crimps on these connectors. These spades and all these, I hate these things. I know if you've got the proper crimping tool they're actually quite good, but I did a lot of audio wiring in my younger years, and these things just always came off on me. So I always pinch them on, and then I put a blob of solder down there as well, just on the end of the wire, just to make sure they're not going to come adrift, because that's, you know, that's annoying. So they're on there. This one already has the old chocky block on the end. Hey, so we can just go underneath there, find a live and a negative, strip them back, stick them in, screw them down, job done. Now I know these chocky blocks get a lot of hate from people, but they're good. They're very good. They're good non-permanent wiring solutions. If you wire something in, it turns out it ain't right, and you've been in there and soldered it and put some heat shrink on it and made it look lovely, and then it ain't working, you've got to peel it all back off again. Chocky blocks, quick screw, job done. You know, people say, well, you know, they're not really fit for purpose, this kind of stuff. Guys, when was the last time you wired in a light at home? Any kind of new light fitting? You've all done it, right? What's inside the light fitting? Chocky blocks. Wires hanging out the ceiling, into a couple of chocky blocks, into your light fitting. So if they're good enough for 240 volt appliances indoors, they're good enough for a 12 volt circuit in a car, right? So just don't come at me with the chocky block thing, alright? Because, you know, just don't. So there we go, guys. She's all installed. Excuse the light reflection, but you know, I think it looks alright. Doesn't look too out of place. I could have put some of that more of the walnut veneer that I used on the dash on the gauges. You know, and as I said before, the gauges look a little bit goofy because the one on the right has obviously got a much larger bezel than the one on the left. But even so, you know, they're you know, it's fit for purpose, as they say. Like I've always said with this car, it's a driver, it's not a show car. It's never been a show car, it never will be a show car. It's my car to drive and enjoy. So I'm not overly bothered. Yeah, I care what it looks like. You know, I wouldn't have gone through the whole rigmarole with the alloy wheels if I didn't. I would have just drove around on stock Steelies because it's period correct. But, you know, I like things to look nice. And gauges, you know, they don't look amazing or anything, but they are functional. They serve a purpose. They both work. It's showing 50 pounds of oil pressure. That's good, and it's stone cold as well. I know obviously the oil will thin as it gets warm, but as you're driving it with the revs, it's going to, you know, it's going to increase. The voltmeter is showing 14 volts with the engine running, which is perfect. That means the alternator is doing its job. I ended up having to take a switched live for the voltmeter. I thought I'd just tap into one of the lives under the dashboard where the cigarette lighter used to be and where the map light used to be. I've got 2 spare lives, currently taped off safely. And then I thought, no, because obviously at that point the volt gauge is going to be on all the time, isn't it? You can't take a permanent live, it has to be a switched live if you only want it running with the engines running. So I ended up splicing into the wire I put in for my horns because there was no switched lives that I could find under the dash, within easy reach anyway. I had to take the steering wheel off, take the ignition barrel off and tap onto the switch live that comes from the ignition switch basically, to run my horns, because obviously they're aftermarket horns, the wiring's different, you know, that kind of thing. So I found that wire under there and I thought perfect, chopped into that, put my positive onto that, negative onto one of the many negatives that are just under the dash anyway, and all is good. So no extra wiring up front for the volt gauge, all the wiring for that stays under the dash, and for the oil pressure switch all we've got is that one hose going through to the front. Need to snip a couple cable ties off that. As you can see there, I've just cable tied that hose onto the brake line where it comes down there, just to try and make it look neat. I still need to come in here and neaten all this up because it does look like an absolute, you know, it does look like a bit of a shed. From this side it looks alright because this is all the business side, isn't it, with the carbons and the filters. On the other side where all your electrical, you know, stuff is, it's a bit of a, you know, it's a bit of an octopus nest. Do octopuses have nests? I don't know. So it does need to be cleaned up one day, but, you know, I've got the rest of my life, haven't I? I've got the rest of my life to tinker with this car and, you know, make small adjustments and that kind of thing. This is really me getting it to what I want. And no doubt there'll be other things I think to do with this car as well. The gauges I've wanted to do for a while. You know, the alloys have been on my mind since I've had the car. The bonnets, struts, all that kind of, you know, the little things you don't need, but they're just handy to have on there. So, what's next? I don't know. I haven't thought of anything yet. I wish I could stop spending money on the damn thing, so it might be a while to my next video, I don't know. But knowing me, I'll come up with something convoluted. But yeah, until then, hopefully that's been of use to someone. Oil pressure gauge, nice and simple. If anyone wants any of the links for any of the stuff, let me know. It's all readily available on eBay. You know, if you look for an oil pressure switch T-piece, you will find one. I chose one that came with the hose to save me buying it separately. Whilst you can get those parts from like Moss and Rimmer and all the other well-known Triumph and British, you know, British Leyland aftermarket places, Spit Bits and all those kind of people, they're a lot more expensive, if I'm being completely honest. The T-piece on its own, you're looking at about £20 posted just for the T-piece, that's not for the hose. Whereas that one was £15 posted with the hose. So it's kind of like, you know, whilst I like to support business and that kind of thing, you know, I'm not paying over the odds for what is essentially just a small machined block of brass. It's, you know, I'm just not doing it. Not when I can get a mini one online for cheaper. So that was pretty straightforward. And like I say, you know, the voltmeter I picked up on Facebook for a tenner. Someone was selling one. Thought great. You know, again, you can get voltmeters online. You can get oil pressure switches online, and they are expensive now. They used to be cheap as chips. You used to be able to pick them up at, you know, car boots for a £5. But I suppose, you know, those days of analog gauges have sort of gone really. All modern cars have digital dash built in with ECUs and all the rest of it that does all that for you. But there's something about analog gauges, isn't there? You turn the engine on and wham, all your needles start quivering, you know. I play flight simulators in my spare time sometimes, so I like looking into the cockpit and seeing all my needles and my gauges. I like to know where things are. Same reason I've got a stereo in the car. I don't want to listen to music when I'm driving this car because A, it's convertible and you look like a dick driving with your music on in a convertible. But also I like to hear the engine. You know, I want to hear how the car's running, I want to be able to see the gauges. It's a more, I keep saying visceral, you know, but it is a more visceral experience when you're driving. Feeling the vibrations through the floor, listening to the tune of the engine, you know, and looking at your analog gauges, seeing how your temperatures and your pressures are doing. You know, it's quite satisfying when it's all running smoothly and you're whizzing along. So that's why I wanted those. But again, very, very simple wiring, really. Yeah, so we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me again. Thanks for subscribing and watching videos and all that kind of good stuff. As I said before, I do appreciate it. You know, it makes it's nice to know that, you know, people are watching the things you're doing. And yeah, see you next time.